EB-5, as I understand it, is an immigrant investor visa program, which essentially allows eligible immigrant investors to secure permanent lawful residency in the United States. But in layman language, what are the terms and conditions? What does this ultimately entail?
So primarily, EB-5 is an investor visa program. So you have to make an investment in the US of $800,000 minimum. And that investment must create 10 full-time jobs in the US economy. And on that basis, you'd get a temporary green card initially, and then a permanent green card down the road.
Well then, Rohit, aren't there, to play devil's advocate for a moment, there are a sea of other avenues, via which one can secure residency in the United States. And many of those avenues have a long-standing history and perhaps even a better success rate. So what makes the EB-5 stand out?
The first thing that makes it stand out is, for most people, it's the fastest route to getting a green card, because the only road that leads you to a faster green card is if you're either getting married to an American citizen or you're being sponsored by your U.S. citizen son or daughter.
Sure.
Other than that, unfortunately, because of the migrant population out of India, this is the fastest road to getting a green card. We all have clients who have been waiting the normal road map, which is the F1, the H1, the green card sponsorship through the employer, for well over a couple of decades. And the way it's foreseen at this point in time, it could be easily another 3 more decades before they see their green cards. So there's certainly limitations if you're tied into the employer.
Absolutely.
And the EB-5 visa allows you to be independent and get a green card independent of your employer, and a lot faster.
Well, Vivek, if I'm understanding the process correctly, it's somewhat calibrated in that, as a first step, one can secure their temporary residency in the United States. That, of course, opens up the possibility of one securing permanent residency and then potentially opening up the doors for citizenship altogether. Have I understood it correctly? And what are some of the loopholes that, in your experience, emerge along the way?
So that is correct. The reason it comes in 2 steps is because the U.S. government, wants to validate that the investment was actually made. If the investment was made, they get you the temporary green card. And once the investment has actually created those 10 full-time jobs in the U.S. economy, that's the second step verification that they do. And then on that basis, you get a permanent green card. Along the ways, there's going to be things that you're going to be looking at and working on in terms of the immigration side of things. But primarily on the investment side, once the investment is made, and it's more or less a passive investment, you're just waiting for the immigration process to come through for you. The investment does mature in about 5 to 7 years, and that's when you can expect repayment.
Well then, Rohit, what are some of the asset classes or the investment vehicles via which perhaps a not-so-savvy investor can take that first step? And are there intermediaries that can manage their money if they don't have the expertise to do so themselves?
Well, I guess the first step would be to probably get some advice either from a person like Vivek Tandon, who is an EB-5 investment advisor, and also to probably do their own due diligence, because tacking on to what Vivek said earlier, the most important way to get the green card through EB-5 is based on job creation. And job creation is what they need to look at in terms of whether that's going to happen or not.
Right.
It's not just the question of putting in $800,000.
Right.
And to get the conditional green card, they need to show the immigration that the jobs will be created. And to get the permanent green card, they have to show that the jobs have been created. So one is forward-looking, one is backward-looking.
Sure.
So they've got to consider that. And then, of course, one of the most popular asset classes is construction. And the reason for that is simple, because construction creates the maximum number of jobs. So most regional center projects will, in one way, shape, or form, be involved with construction, because you've got different kinds of jobs that are created.
Sure.
And that's through economic modeling. So that's the most popular class. And then that could be commercial real estate, could be residential real estate. You've seen hotels and the hospitality industry affected a bit, obviously, because of the pandemic. So those would be primarily the asset classes.
Well, that leads to a wonderful segue into my next question, which is to you, Vivek, because there seem to be 2 very distinct approaches here to, obtaining one's EB-5. One is essentially the direct investment route, and one is the regional center route. Help me distinguish between the 2.
So a regional center is basically a government-approved entity, and that entity is usually a private business. So it's a government-approved entity that acts as an intermediary between EB-5 investors that want a green card and generally a developer in the U.S. that is looking for money to build something. Speaking about asset classes, you could be investing in the hospitality industry, in the housing industry, in the industrial sector. In fact, we're currently funding projects through the EB-5 program in all of those three sectors. So that's on the regional center side of things. So you can think of it as investing in a project or some sort of a project. Direct EB-5, which is a less traveled road, about 3% of EB-5 applications go direct. About 97% of EB-5 applications go through a regional center. In a direct, it's a very hands-on approach. You literally have to start a brand new business, and you have the responsibility of creating and maintaining those 10 full-time jobs, which, as you can imagine, is not a small task for anybody who's especially residing outside of the U.S. Versus the regional center, it's a very outsourced approach.
Sure.
You're engaging with the regional center who's sponsoring a development project. The development project is borrowing money from EB-5 investors. It's a cheaper source of capital for them. So the idea is to really create a win-win situation where developers get access to cheaper financing and the EB-5 investors get access to job creation. And as Rohit mentioned, the job creation actually comes through an economic model. So basically, an economist will produce a report that says, say if you spend $500 million in the San Francisco Bay Area, building a housing project, then you will end up creating about 4,000 jobs in the local and national economy.
Sure.
So all of those jobs actually get qualified as EB-5 jobs. And EB-5 will be part of the financing. It will not be all of the financing, it'll be part of the financing. So say if the EB-5 part is 50 million or 100 million out of that $500 million capital stack, then maybe you have, say, 100 investors.
Right.
So you need to create about 1,000 jobs, but the expenditure of 500 million will end up creating more than 4,000.
Sure.
So the job creation becomes very easy, very sufficient, and then again, on that basis, you would qualify to get both the temporary green card and the permanent green card down the road.
Well, Rohit, the two of you are, of course, very seasoned experts when it comes to immigration by way of investment. But I think what's become obvious is there are some finer nuances here, and there are some underlying complexities. So at what age and stage in the process do you recommend that an EB-5 applicant seek out the professional guidance of an investment banker or a legal advisor, for that matter?
Right from the get-go. You always want to be taking the right step right from the beginning, because otherwise things can get pretty confusing. So there are definitely people out there in the market who may be offering advice that may not be in your best interest. Somebody who's been around the block. I've done over 250 cases for people born out of India. So, and of course, being from Bombay myself, I certainly have an understanding of India and of the people, which is a huge plus. So I would say right from the get-go, you need to do your own due diligence. People like Vivek and I can assist you in walking that path and going down the right direction. Because, like you correctly said, it is a process, and it's a process that takes 5 to 7 years. You want to feel comfortable with the people that you're going to be dealing with for 5 to 7 years. Your immigration lawyer is going to be somebody closer to you than just at the EB-5 level, because if somebody is there, they're probably on a student visa, on a work visa, and all those things eventually somehow interact with one another. And you're going to be working with somebody like an investment advisor through the process, because not only is he going to guide you for investing the money or selecting the project probably, but also in terms of what's going on with the project, what's going on with the money. You can get the updates from that person. So you have your go-to people. You have your immigration lawyer for immigration, you have your EB-5 investment advisor for your money that's going to be invested and remain at risk for 5 to 7 years.
Well then, Vivek, help me understand this. In the applications that you've received and reviewed over the years, what typically gives an applicant a leg up? How does one stand out?
So first and foremost, the U.S. government is concerned about what they call source of funds, meaning where did the money come from to make the EB-5 investment? And that's exactly what Rohit and his firm would really focus on. So Rohit's role ends up being sort of doing the due diligence on the client's source of funds. And as long as their source of funds is clean, clear, convincing, they should not have any issues, getting their approval. But of course, the other side of the coin is where to invest. So as a U.S. investment banker and a lawyer, it's my job to tell them where to invest and where not to invest to make sure we make a sound investment decision. There are probably about 400 to 500 EB-5 regional centers in the market. There's close to 100 EB-5 projects in the market. we get approached by maybe half a dozen of these guys every single month. We do some preliminary due diligence to basically eliminate the ones that are contacting us. And then the ones that make it through round one, we do a very deep dive due diligence to make sure our clients' financial interests are going to be well protected. So this is an at-risk investment, as Rohit just mentioned, but with proper due diligence, it doesn't have to be a risky investment.
Sure.
There's ways to figure out projects and regional centers where the risk is mitigated.
Well, Rohit, given the hand-holding that the two of you do with respect to guiding an investor through their immigration journey, help me understand what some of the most commonly made mistakes are. Where do people go wrong in this process?
Understanding the process is important, which I think is where Vivek and I make the most impact right in the beginning, because there are so many misconceptions. There is so much written about the program. It's not that there isn't enough written about it, but it's nuanced, like you referred to it earlier. There's marketing, and there's reality.
Right.
And I think that's where it helps to connect with the right investment advisor, the right immigration attorney, so that there's a holistic view that's taken. When I sit and talk to a potential investor, I'm not just looking to see his source of funds, certainly not until I'm engaged.
Right.
But I do want to understand that individual's background, their family, what are their dreams and aspirations, because at the end of the day, we're just a vehicle to help them get there.
Right.
That's the way I see it. So it is important to understand where they're coming from, and they need to also understand that the person they're talking to has explored all the options and is interested in their best interests. I think Vivek alluded to it. The SEC has a new guideline which refers to the best interests of the client, which is what Vivek is now tasked with.
Right.
For me, it's always the person's green card. So I want to make sure that they will get their green card. And like Vivek said earlier, my biggest role is to make sure their source of funds is going to pass the USCIS review and pass their muster. Just to clarify, I can never tell them where to invest, which is the reason why we're such a good tandem team.
Right.
Because you need a license from the SEC or FINRA to be able to give that guidance. And under the new law, you even need to be registered with the USCIS, because they want to obviously eliminate the bad actors.
Well, speaking of which, Rohit, Vivek, I've come to understand that there is now a newly implemented EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act, implemented in 2022, and it's been touted as transforming the process entirely. To what extent is that true? What are the actual on-ground changes that you've faced in the process?
Sure. So unfortunately, EB-5 had its own set of issues. We're dealing with a lot of money. We're dealing with people's immigration future, dealing with projects in the U.S. and financing and all those things. So things weren't exactly regulated and monitored by USCIS until now. So basically the program lapsed. Well, in fact, the US government let the program lapse. They went back to the drawing board and they came up in consensus with the EB-5 industry, the Reform and Integrity Act of 2022, which was signed into law by President Biden back on March 15th of last year. And now there's a lot more transparency. There's a lot more regulatory, requirements.
Sure.
There's more investor protection measures. The fees have gone up, so it does eliminate the ones that are not, in the EB-5 industry for the right reasons.
Sure.
For the most part, the EB-5 industry is a good industry, but as Rohit, mentioned earlier, certainly there are bad actors, just like there are in, every industry out there. So with EB-5, we just want to make sure that everybody's financial and immigration interests are well protected, and that's where, the government agencies like USCIS, which is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, they come into place. That's where SEC, which is the equivalent of SEBI in the U.S., they come into play, and then something called FINRA, which is Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. So at the end of the day, you want to make sure that these immigrant investors' financial interests, immigration interests are well taken care of.
Well, a segue there, Rohit, is that this particular program, the EB-5, has really captured the imagination and the heart and the mind of so many students of Indian origin, working professionals of Indian origin across the Indian diaspora globally. Where and how does it fit like hand in glove?
You want to migrate to the US, you want to migrate sooner than later, you want to protect the children's opportunities to work in the United States without being dependent on an employer sponsorship. EB-5 is your answer, clearly. And one of the biggest changes that we've had with this new EB-5 Integrity Reform and Integrity Act is they allow for what is called adjustment or concurrent adjustment of status, which means if the individual is there on an F1, if the individual is there on an H1, they can apply for their green card being there on the ground. Doesn't mean they're getting their green card sooner, but as part of that process, they can get two interim benefits which are of tremendous value. One is called the Employment Authorization Document, which allows them to work in any legally acceptable job that they want to. And second is the Advanced Parole, which is a travel-related document. So even while they're waiting for the approximate time of 2 to 4 years to get their green card, they do get the benefit of being able to work, which is a great equalizer for students when they're graduating from college, because somebody might graduate with an engineering degree, if they have an EAD, they can maybe become a poet if that's what their heart desires. If they were going to focus only on the work permission that comes through their graduate studies or through their undergrad studies, they'd have to work in the field of engineering. So it's just, it's a great equalizer. It's just an amazing change of events in terms of the process for EB-5, no question about that.
And Vivek, in your mind, how did the pandemic sort of impact interest in the EB-5? How would you characterize that blow that we all faced?
So everything did come to a halt, but I think it was a good break because it gave the US government to revisit the program. See, the program's been around since 1990, and it was about time that they revisited the program, revised, all the investor protection measures, the safety nets, and of course, in the process, they ended up revising the investment amount as well. So it used to be $500,000, then it went to $900,000, then it was rolled back to $500,000, but now it's set at $800,000 for investments in what they call a rural area or a targeted employment area. Targeted employment area just means that the unemployment rate in that specific area where you're making the investment, where the project is located, the unemployment rate is 1.5 times of the national average. If it's neither a rural area nor a TEA, then the investment amount is $1,050,000. But most EB-5 investments, especially the ones in our portfolio, they're going to be at the $800,000 mark.
This is highly advantageous for the United States as well, because they're now recruiting top talent and creating jobs domestically, right? So help us better understand kind of that bilateral understanding between the two countries, India and the United States, and how it focuses around the EB-5.
I'm not so sure that there's necessarily a bilateral understanding, but I think it would be factually correct to say that the U.S. is the most powerful magnet when it comes to studies and academics and people wanting to explore opportunities over there. So I think the U.S. clearly, like you said, welcomes these people, gives them the opportunity through this process. So far as India is concerned, it is a great opportunity where somebody from India is going to become good or great through this process faster than they otherwise might have been if they were going to be sponsored by an employer. And I think we've seen that through the heads of different organizations, the number of CEOs, but certainly you've got these soft advantages, even if not the very, very obvious ones of just being able to migrate.
And in your own personal and professional journey, what would you characterize as some of the most significant EB-5 success stories that have really stood out in your mind over the years?
There's been many. So I have advised over 250 EB-5 clients till date in the last 8 years. Fortunately, based on our due diligence, nobody in a troubled project, no denials till date. So I think it's the outcomes. So we're very outcome-oriented, and the outcome is plain and simple. At the end of the day, when they can live there, study there, work there, that's pretty much the fruit that they're looking for based on this investment. It really levels the playing field. When students go from this country to that country on an F1 visa, they go through 4 years or 2 years of education, and then upon graduation, they're having a lot of doors shut on them because they need employers to sponsor them. And because the playing field is not leveled, a lot of the times they end up being frustrated. So it's really addressing that frustration and providing them the freedom through their parents' resources, if the parents are the ones funding the EB-5, or folks that are already there in that country who have worked at, the big name tech companies, say in Silicon Valley. These folks have gotten a lot of, shares and whatnot, and they liquidate those. And then they feel free. That's one less thing that they have to worry about. And it does circle back. not only do these students go there and do really well and succeed and work at top-notch companies, they actually bring back that wealth of knowledge, that wealth of experience, and they do startups in India.
Right.
So, it does circle back. The money circles back as well. The talent circles back. The knowledge circles back. The success circles back.
Right.
So when you talk about, bilateral, say, benefits, I think it's beneficial to both India and the U.S., and it just leads to a stronger relationship with the two countries who traditionally have had, strong relationships nonetheless.
And Rohit, the work that the two of you do, it impacts generations, right? It transforms their future entirely. How does that feel? What sort of personal satisfaction do you derive from that?
Fantastic. You feel absolutely on top of the world when the client's green card arrives in the mail, or the client calls you and said, I had a successful interview. You look at the approval, and you almost become like a family advisor.
Right.
The immigration attorney certainly works more closely with the clients than the investment advisor, just because of the way life is.
Sure.
So you get to know them on a much more personal level, and it is a great feeling. And sometimes it can be frustrating when things don't go right, although they should go right, and their struggle is your struggle.
Right.
So it does become personal, and you do get to know the people really well. So it's a great feeling.
And by way of closing comments, I'll ask the same question to the two of you. What more would you like to see by way of transformation as far as the EB-5 program is concerned, to see it reaching higher heights in the future? Vivek, let's start with you.
I'm all for regulation. The more regulation there is, the better it is for the investors, because at the end of the day, it's a big decision. It's a large commitment of funds. And as you said earlier, it's a life-changing experience for them. So we want to make sure that people are not treated as numbers. People are treated as people, and they have their dreams, they have their aspirations, and we just want to be that vehicle so that they can get to their end goal and that they can be successful, whether it's here, whether it's there.
I'll give you the last word, Rohit.
Regulation is good because it tries to at least minimize, if not eliminate, the bad actors, and that protects the investors. So I think everybody's got to keep it in mind that it's the investor's money, it's the investor's green card, it's the investor's interest that should be paramount to everybody, whether it's the investment advisor, whether it's the immigration lawyer.
Well, thank you both for taking the time to speak with us, and we wish you both continued success.
Thank you.
Thank you.